On the evening of March 31, 2006, a bright, ambitious 27-year-old medical student named Brian Shaffer decided to celebrate the start of his spring break. He had just aced his exams, and his future seemed incredibly promising. He planned to take his girlfriend, Alexis, on a trip to Miami, and he was even thinking about proposing. But first, he wanted to have a night out with his friends. It was a simple plan, a night of bar hopping to blow off some steam before his vacation. But what started as a celebration would soon turn into one of the most baffling and unsettling mysteries of the 21st century. Because after Brian walked into a bar that night, he was never seen again. Brian Shaffer was in his second year at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. Friends and family described him as responsible, intelligent, and driven. His life had been touched by tragedy just a few weeks earlier when his mother, Renee, passed away from cancer. It was a devastating blow for Brian, and those close to him said he was struggling with the loss, but he was doing his best to cope. He had a strong support system, including his father, Randy, his younger brother, Derek, and his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, who was also a medical student. The night began around 9 p.m. Brian met up with his father, Randy, for a steak dinner to kick off the celebration. Randy noted that Brian seemed exhausted from his recent exams but was otherwise in good spirits. After dinner, Brian headed out to meet his friend, William Clint Florence. Their plan was to visit several bars in the Ugly Tuna Saloon, an area near the Ohio State campus, known for its vibrant nightlife. They started their tours, moving from one packed establishment to the next, having a few drinks at each stop. Sometime after midnight, Brian called his girlfriend, Alexis. She was back at her parents' house for the weekend, but had planned to meet up with him later. During the call, Brian told her he loved her, and they made plans for their upcoming trip. It was a normal, loving conversation, the kind they had all the time. It would be the last time Alexis ever heard his voice. After the call, Brian and Clint continued their night out. They eventually made their way to the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a popular bar located on the second floor of a building. To get in or out, you had to use a single escalator, which was the only public entrance and exit. At approximately 1:15 a.m. on the morning of April 1st, a security camera positioned at the top of that escalator captured footage of Brian Shaffer. He was outside the entrance to the Ugly Tuna, talking briefly with two young women. After a short chat, he turned and walked back inside the bar. This is the last confirmed, verifiable image of Brian Shaffer that exists. For the next 45 minutes, what he did inside the bar is a matter of speculation. Clint Florence would later tell police that at some point, he and Brian got separated in the crowded bar. Around 2 a.m., the bar was getting ready to close. Clint waited outside, expecting Brian to emerge with the rest of the crowd. He tried calling Brian's phone, but it went straight to voicemail, assuming Brian had simply walked home without telling him, which was something he had apparently done before. Clint didn't think too much of it and left. The next day, however, Brian missed his flight to Miami. He was supposed to pick up Alexis that morning, but he never showed up. This was extremely out of character. Brian was dependable, and a trip with Alexis was something he had been looking forward to for a long time. When Alexis couldn't reach him, she and Brian's father, Randy, became deeply concerned. They went to his apartment, but he wasn't there. His car was still parked in its usual spot. Inside his apartment, everything seemed normal. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that he had been packing for his trip, and nothing seemed out of place. It was as if he had simply vanished after leaving for the bar. They immediately filed a missing persons report with the Columbus police, and a massive search began. The investigation quickly zeroed in on the Ugly Tuna Saloon. The building's security cameras became the most critical piece of evidence. Investigators meticulously reviewed hours of footage from every camera in and around the building. They saw Brian enter the bar at 1:15 a.m. But as they scoured the tapes, a chilling and impossible reality began to set in. They watched every single person leave the bar after closing time. They saw Clint Florence waiting outside. They saw the two women Brian had spoken to leave. They saw every patron, every employee, every single person who was in that building walk out and down that escalator. But they never saw Brian. Police were baffled. How could a person walk into a building with only one public exit and not be seen leaving? They considered every possibility. Was there another way out? The building did have a service exit in the back, but it led to a construction site that was described as messy and difficult to navigate, especially in the dark. It would have been an unlikely path for anyone to take, especially someone who had been drinking. Furthermore, that service door was not typically used by patrons. and a camera pointed at it also showed no sign of Brian. The police even brought in search dogs, but they lost Brian's scent just outside the bar's entrance, which suggested he may have gotten into a vehicle, but there was no evidence of this. The investigators began to look closely at the people Brian was with that night. His friend, Clint Florence, was questioned extensively. His story remained consistent. He and Brian were separated in the crowd, and he assumed Brian had gone home on his own. However, Clint's behavior raised some questions. Initially, he was cooperative, but as the investigation wore on, he refused to take a polygraph test, and eventually hired a lawyer, ceasing all communication with both the police and the Shaffer family. This led many, including Brian's father, to suspect that Clint knew more than he was letting on. But without any evidence, it was just a suspicion. The two women Brian was seen speaking with on the security footage were later identified and questioned. They confirmed they had a brief, casual conversation with him, but they didn't know him and had no further interaction with him that night. As weeks turned into months, and then years, with no new leads, theories began to emerge. The first and most straightforward theory is that Brian was a victim of foul play. Perhaps he got into an altercation inside the bar, was harmed, and his body was somehow removed from the building, evading all the security cameras. This seems incredibly difficult to achieve. It would have required a coordinated effort to sneak a body out of a busy building, past multiple cameras, without anyone noticing. There was a freight elevator, but using it would have likely required employee access. No evidence has ever surfaced to support this theory. Another theory is that Brian left the bar and met with foul play immediately outside. This would explain why the search dogs lost his scent near the street. Maybe he accepted a ride from someone, or was abducted. Again, this is pure speculation. The area was crowded, and it's hard to believe a struggle or abduction would have gone unnoticed by the dozens of people leaving the bars at that time. Then there is the theory that Brian disappeared intentionally. Some have speculated that, overwhelmed by the grief of his mother's death and the pressures of medical school, he decided to walk away and start a new life. Those who knew him best, including his girlfriend and father, have always insisted this was completely against his character. He loved his life, he loved Alexis, and he was excited about his future as a doctor. It just didn't make sense. However, there have been several unconfirmed sightings of him over the years, including one in a restaurant in Sweden and another in Mexico. None of these have ever been substantiated. The idea that he could have orchestrated such a clean disappearance, creating a new identity, and evading detection for years, seems almost as improbable as the idea that he vanished into thin air. Tragically, the search for answers took a heavy toll on Brian's family. His father, Randy Shaffer, dedicated the rest of his life to finding his son. He worked tirelessly with investigators, followed up on every tip, and maintained a website to keep Brian's case in the public eye. In 2008, a freak accident occurred. During a severe windstorm, a tree fell and struck Randy while he was outside his home, killing him instantly. With Randy's death, the last member of Brian's immediate family was gone, as his brother Derek had become estranged. The primary driving force behind the search for Brian was silenced. To this day, the disappearance of Brian Shaffer remains unsolved. He was declared legally dead in 2008. The Columbus police have stated that the case is still open and active, but there have been no significant developments in over a decade. Clint Florence has never spoken publicly about the case since he stopped cooperating with the police. The Ugly Tuna Saloona has since closed down. All that remains is the final haunting image of a young man on the cusp of a brilliant future turning to walk back into a bar and then, for all intents and purposes, vanishing from the face of the earth. It's a case with no witnesses, no motive, and no evidence. It's a perfect mystery, one that defies logical explanation, leaving only questions and a profound sense of unease. How does a person just disappear? That is going to do it for today, but if you enjoyed this story, be sure to check out our channel right here. We're going to be dropping stories every single day, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. I really appreciate you guys spending your time here with me today. Until next time, from Silent Secret Stories, every secret has a story.